Before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that this session is being recorded by the University of Maryland and will be posted to our YouTube channel afterwards. If you do not consent to being recorded, you can remove yourself from the call at this time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining our event this evening between the Center for Social Value Creation and Social Innovation Fellows. We are so excited to have you today to discuss social enterprise and emergence of the specialty chocolate industry, the past, present, and future. My name is Nima Farshi, and I'm the director of the Center for Social Value Creation here at the Smith School. Our mission is to educate, engage, and empower Smith students to create a better world through business. And we are so excited to have this phenomenal panel share their thoughts, their insights on how something as exciting as the chocolate industry can have a positive impact on our society. At the end of this event, we are also excited to have a chocolate tasting. I'll pass it off to David Kirsch from Social Innovation Fellows, our partner for this event.
Thank you, Nima. I'll keep things brief. Just to set the context a little bit, there are probably, let's see, there should be about 20 odd Smith undergrad students who are members of Social Innovation Fellows Cohort 11, for whom this is our regularly scheduled class, and to whom, with the help of Chef Rosen and William Mullen, we were able to provide actual samples of bean to bar chocolate, and we will be sampling with our chocolate makers' help, tasting some of that chocolate towards the end of the class. But before we get there, we really want to set the stage, and for that we have no better interlocutor than Carla Martin, who's founder of FCCI, the Fine Chocolate and Cacao Institute, I believe, based up at Harvard. And Carla, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kind of introduce our esteemed guests from far and wide, and take us on our way. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nima and David. It's really thrilling to be here. Thank you too to Stephen and to Isabella, who've been helping behind the scenes to make this gathering run smoothly. I know that some of you have chocolate. You're of course welcome to start eating it, but I might recommend on behalf of our esteemed panelists who will guide you through a tasting at the end that you save at least a little bit if you can, so that we can discuss it together. As it was mentioned, my name is Carla Martin. I am a professor. I teach a class called Chocolate Culture and the Politics of Food. And I've been doing research for about 10 years now on the politics of the global cacao and chocolate value chain. And I'm going to kick us off just to get us all with the same basic amount of information about this value chain. And I wanted to start by thinking too, I know that some of you are social innovation fellows, you're interested in social entrepreneurship if you're here, I hope, also interested in chocolate. Think of chocolate and cacao, the primary raw material that goes into it, as a classic example of what happens in a commodity production system under capitalism, where capitalism is, as we know, a system that aims to create a huge amount of wealth for a small number of people. That's the way it was designed. It's the way it's always operated. However, there are a number of companies in this cacao and chocolate value chain that now attempt to operate somewhat differently. To give you a sense of the scale of the chocolate industry, the average American consumer eats about 12 pounds or 5.5 kilos of chocolate per person per year. She's not here with me right now, but I have a cat. Her weight is around 12 pounds. That gives you a sense of the scale of the chocolate that people are consuming in the United States. We don't even come close to maxing out those numbers. The Swiss double us every year in the amount of chocolate that they consume. And consumers in the US spend 22 billion US dollars on chocolate. One of the biggest holidays for chocolate is actually Halloween, coming up later this week. And Halloween is an area in which chocolate's concentration in the marketplace dominates. They were originally individual family-owned companies, produce 99.9% of the bite-sized chocolate candies that are consumed at Halloween. And of course, given this moment of COVID-19, what's been happening behind the scenes is large trade associations, for example, the National Confectioners Association, which is responsible for in many ways creating the chocolate around different holidays or the desire for chocolate, or the Halloween and Costume Association have been marketing socially distanced Halloween to try and keep chocolate sales high. They're encouraging people to get candy chutes that allow them to send chocolate from a distant window to kids as they come trick-or-treating. Or they're selling things like little grabbers that allow you to hand a piece of chocolate from far away. So even in this week, the chocolate industry is scrambling to keep sales going. Now, globally, this is a $100 billion per year industry, and that's enormous, but it's characterized by vast inequalities. Out of that $100 billion per year, cacao farmers typically get only about 3 to 6% of the overall profit from any existing chocolate bar, if we want to think about it in those terms. In addition, there are stark contrasts between who produces cacao, the primary raw material, and who produces chocolate. Americans and Europeans consume 75% of the world's chocolate. So we're eating the most by far. We produce about 0% of the world's cacao. There's a small amount grown in Hawaii. There's a little bit that you can find in people's gardens in like Florida, but it's not, as you would imagine, the same level of production. In fact, 75% of the world's cacao, that raw material, is produced in Africa. Africans themselves actually only consume 4% of the world's chocolate. And a large reason for that is acquisitive power, the access to the resources that would allow them to consume the same amount of chocolate that we do. When it comes to concentration in the marketplace, chocolate is also a classic example of capitalism run wild. What we have are 5 companies. There's a 6th now jumping in. I'll tell you their names in just a second. They are world confectionery market share dominators. These are branded retail manufacturers. That's a mouthful. But what these are companies like Mars, Kraft, Hershey, Nestle, Ferrero, and the 6th is now Meiji from Japan. These are companies that control an enormous amount of the market share in what confectionery, what chocolate candies make their way to you. Production of cacao is also similarly concentrated. 60% of the world's cacao is produced in 2 countries, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa. And all of this contributes to an inequality that is designed, it is literally built into the fabric of how this value chain operates, in that large multinational corporations control the movement of cacao around the world, the price, and how it is actually changing or beneficial to cacao producers, and what types of candies make their way to you. If you've ever been to a grocery store and you go into the chocolate aisle, it looks as though we have a huge amount of choice available to us. But for those in the know, what you see is a lot of the same. It's a lot of stuff that is majority sugar with some milk and maybe some chocolate flavoring added. Now, that's fine if that's what you like. That doesn't matter. We're not here to say don't have sugary things. What we are here to say is be aware of the value and where it moves within a value chain and whether or not it's equitably distributed. In many ways, we've been deluded into thinking that we as consumers have a lot of choice about the chocolate in front of us. But as I just told you, most of it's coming from the same small number of companies that have operated with similar business practices that are highly inequitable for a really long time. That is why the companies that you're about to hear from are quite different. They imagine this capitalist enterprise differently. They envision themselves as a type of social enterprises. They push value differently throughout the cacao and chocolate value chain. And I'll give them the opportunity to briefly introduce themselves and tell you why it is that what they do is different. Okay, so with encouragement to keep this brief because our time is brief and intros are fun, but we'll get into the meaty stuff of our conversation after these intros. I'd like to first ask Simran Bindra, And William Mullen, if you will, to please introduce your company. Simran, if you'll start, and William, you go next. For all of those of you who are listening, this is a pairing between someone who is involved in the cacao business and someone who is involved in the chocolate business that also has led to one of the products you're about to taste. Simran, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Carla, for doing such a great job of setting the scene on the global sort of commodity cocoa and chocolate market. And thank you to David and his team for giving us the opportunity to share a bit about what we do. Like Carla said, my name is Simran, and I'm one of the founders of a company called Cocoa Kamili here in Tanzania, which is where I am now. And so what we did was we set up a company in 2013. My business partner, Brian, and myself, having spent most of our careers working in international development, we'd gone through sort of similar realizations of, or similar frustrations with a lot of the development space. And we're both interested in seeing how we could use the private sector to sort of try to affect change in a more sustainable fashion than some of the donor projects that we've been spending our careers working on. And we sort of fell into cocoa. I was initially, I'd moved up here from Southern Africa to work on a short-term cocoa project, and then left that job to work for an investment fund, and then sort of formulated starting up this company. And over the course of our research, learned about what Emily had been up to in Belize, and many Skype calls across various time zones with Emily. Came about to set up the company that we began some years ago, and we're based out of central Tanzania in a place called the Kilombero Valley, where we work with smallholder farmers buying their sort of wet cocoa, which then goes through a fermentation and drying process, which is where as much as sort of 60 or 70% of the flavor profile comes from. And when you're selling into this sort of emerging wave of craft chocolate, companies like Williams and Josh's, these companies sort of really care about the quality of the cocoa. If you're making a 70 or 100% chocolate bar with only a few ingredients, and 70% of that finished product comes from one ingredient, cocoa, that cocoa better taste good. And if 70% of that flavor comes during the fermentation and drying process, you better have a good handle on that process. So we thought, well, let's take on the work of doing the fermentation and drying ourselves, pay the farmers far more than they would receive if they were to do it, and free up their time to be able to focus on their farming and their other projects, while we produce the best quality cocoa that we can for companies like Williams. So that's essentially what we started out doing. We currently we have registered with us around about 4,500 smallholder farmers, all based in the valley that we're in. Each year we actively buy from around half of them. At our peak we have, which is right now, we have about 60 or 70 staff working with us. All except for one are from the village that we're based in. And all, I think, except for 3 of them, this is their first time job or their first formal engagement with the formal employment sector. So it's pretty rewarding. It's a pretty remote part of the country. So, it's only 500 kilometers from the main city, but it can take up to sort of 12, 14 hours to reach. We don't have electricity or cell phone service is much better now than it used to be. But when we started out, it was drive to the cell phone tower to be able to make a phone call. But yeah, we're pretty proud of the work that we do, and really happy to be able to work with companies like Williams to produce some of what we think is some of the best cocoa in the world, so that they can produce the best chocolate in the world.
William, please go ahead. Thank you, Simran.
Yeah, thanks, Simran. Thank you, Carla. Hello, everyone. Excited to be here. I'm William Mullen. I'm the brand director for Rocket Chocolate. So we make bean-to-bar chocolate without roasting. We're based in Red Hook, Brooklyn. We're about 10 years old now. We've been working with Simran and Cocoa Kamili for, oh gosh, I feel like the last 4 to 5 years potentially. So yeah, we make small batch chocolate. We started focusing on sort of single origin inclusion bars and really grew with that, kind of marrying a bean flavor with a specific, or a bean with a specific flavor profile. Like in the case of Simran, it's really fruity and creamy, with maybe an inclusion or process that really highlights that flavor profile. So one of our best-selling bars is our Bourbon Cascades bar, and we use the Coco Camilli beans for that. And we age them in bourbon barrels for about 6 weeks. We find that the flavor of the barrel, that oaky, vanilla kind of char flavor, really complements the flavor of Coco Camilli cacao. And so that we'll do other things like maybe use a fruitier bean from Peru for our Bananas Foster bar that really brings out those like more kind of intensely rich ripe fruit notes, or pair like an earthier bean like Simuliki Forest from Uganda with a more classic chocolatey flavor profile, like in the case of our new waffle cone bar. So that's really kind of like the highlight of what we do. And as small batch chocolate makers, folks like Simran and the team at Coco Camilli and Emily and the folks at Uncommon are really important to us because, you know, we're based in Brooklyn and we are making chocolate around the clock 7 days a week. It's being a small company, we can't exactly have boots on the ground all the time or someone always at origin that can be an expert in that field as well. And so having partners at origin, working with small farmers, ensuring quality to work with and communicate with is super helpful in making this whole slice of the industry function. I guess I could give a little bit more of an overview. First, Craft Chocolate Maker, we're kind of large, I guess. We can be found in Whole Foods, which is unique in our space. We also still sell to a lot of small specialty independent retailers, and those are still the bread and butter of our business. Let's see, we have about 9 to 11 SKUs at any one time. And the heart of our company, even though it is a small slice of our company, is our subscription plan, where we make 2 new bars every month and we ship those directly to subscribers. We have about 1,300, I think, right now, if I'm not mistaken. And it kind of ebbs and flows with the holiday season. And what we really like about that is we're able to get around some of the kind of intense red tape that comes with trying to scale as a small business, which I think prevents a lot of craft chocolate makers from really entering the market. We can focus on just an origin through our subscription. We can buy 1 bag of beans and use that, or 2 bags from 2 different smaller cooperatives in Peru, and compare the flavor profiles. And it essentially functions as a CSA because customers have prepaid for these bars. And then we have to make them good. And but it gets people to try things that they wouldn't pick up off of a shelf, which I think, you know, craft chocolate has a little bit of a problem doing, since there's sort of already this audience that's bought into it, that understands concepts like origin. The barrier to entry is high if you don't get those concepts, and it's hard for craft chocolate makers to spend what little resources they have to educate consumers about that. So our subscription plan has been really helpful in that way. We've learned a lot about how people learn about craft chocolate and what flavors they're willing to at least accept after a taste, if not necessarily pick up off of a shelf at a major national retailer quite yet. But yeah, we also work with Simran to build out our transparent trade label, which is on the inside of every bar, and just kind of explain to our customers how our supply chain works. We can talk a little bit more about that when we taste the bars, but yeah, just I don't know. I think I'm talking too long. That's good. I think let's start off.
Yeah, thank you both so much for making this clear. I hope that what has been conveyed, certainly what I've heard, is that there's a level of mastery of information, of trade, of business building that is considerable, but it is in two directions. One is cacao, preparing it and getting it ready for export. The other is getting that cacao, making it into chocolate, and making it available to consumers. Sometimes I think of this as almost two separate industries that need to be understood, that interact with one another. And if we think about the distances, just physical, that are covered in this kind of work, they're also considerable. I just did a quick Google and saw that Tanzania to New York is 7,500 miles as the crow flies. That's a long distance for information, for people, for a commodity product, for flavor, for all of these things to be sort of translated. And of course, it requires massive shipping apparatuses to move things around the world. There's a lot that goes into this that makes something successful or not. So thank you to you both for getting us there and for thinking about that. Our next kind of pairing of people is our colleague Emily Stone of Uncommon Cacao and our colleague Joshua Rosen of Charm School Chocolate, who together have brought together the raw materials and the finished product that leads to the Charm School Chocolate Bar that you all have hopefully in front of you. Emily, would you like to kick us off?
Sure thing. Thank you, Carla, and thank you, David and team. It's really fun. It's a great opportunity to be here with you all today to talk about cacao and chocolate. So as Carla mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Uncommon Cacao. We're actually a group of companies that work across the cacao supply chain, offering a farm to factory, radically transparent and really high quality approach to sourcing cacao for the bean to bar and craft chocolate market. So what that means is basically we actually have a couple different export operations. They're both in Central America, and I'll get into a little bit about how those started in a second. One is in Belize. It's called Maya Mountain Cacao. Those are the beans that we'll be tasting today in Josh's chocolate. And we also have a second operation in Guatemala called Cacao Vera Paz. And about 5 years ago, we actually started an office in the US called Uncommon Cacao, where we bring in the beans from those two export operations, as well as many other partners around the world. And we supply cacao to about 250 chocolate makers around the world. So we store cacao in warehouses on the East Coast of the US, on the West Coast of the US, and in Europe. And our model from the very beginning has really been grounded in the concepts of quality and transparency. In my previous career, I was an activist. I was a corporate activist. So I worked for a socially responsible investment company, pressuring large corporations, publicly traded corporations, to improve their practices on the environment, on human rights, and other important issues. And it was through that work that I learned about all of the problems in the chocolate supply chain and about the failures of traditional sort of impact or sustainability models like certifications, fair trade certification, Rainforest Alliance, OOT, some of these other ones you may have seen, to solve those problems. The evidence was starting to come from coffee and other sectors, and increasingly from cacao, that while these certifications provided a baseline for basic protection of human rights and basic transparency and record keeping across the supply chain, there were these major systemic problems that Carla alluded to that were not being addressed. And so that sort of combined with the new dynamics of the bean to bar market that was emerging in the United States, this was back in 2009, 2010, led me to actually move to Central America, and with stated demand from a couple of the newest pioneer bean to bar makers back in the early 2010s to start Maya Mountain Cacao, Cacao Vera Paz, and then that's grown into Uncommon Cacao. So yeah, we're now sourcing from over 5,400 smallholder farmers across 10 countries, using radically transparent trade, publishing farm gate price, export price, landed price, and sales price. So all of the margins across the supply chain to anyone who's interested in seeing them, whether that's farmers, consumers, chocolate makers, or competitors. And we believe that this transparency across the supply chain, not only on the information of, traceability, where is this cacao being produced, who's producing it, what kind of, environmental impacts might it be having, but actually the pure business practices of the model itself in terms of how our business operates and how we hold ourselves accountable to being responsible connectors across the supply chain. We believe that's really important. And of course, making sure that it's an incredibly high quality product so that the sustainability of the market demand will continue and increase over time. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emily. Josh, how does this play into what you do at Charm School?
Well, thank you for the introduction, and obviously to David and this wonderful team for pulling all this together. So my name is Joshua Rosen. I am the chef and owner of Charm School Chocolate right here in Baltimore, Maryland. Since I happen to be talking to a local crowd, which is somewhat rare since we do these kind of things all across the country and world, I'll say we're actually in Hunt Valley, so a little north of Baltimore, but I grew up here, so this is my hometown. So I started Charm School Chocolate as a small bean to bar chocolate company. So very similar kind of DNA to Raka in that, usually it starts with a couple people who get really excited about the food crafting aspect and want to bring, interesting, more delicious products to market. Our company is very small. There's only 3 of us at the moment, actually 4, I should say. One's part-time, but 3 full-time. So it's incredibly handmade. I don't think we could have any more, involvement of each person. Every single chocolate bar definitely touches all of our hands as we obviously create chocolate from the fantastic beans that we're able to source from people like Emily. And I should say specifically Emily, because we've been working together since I opened my company in 2012. So I built a company essentially around the delicious beans that she happened to bring to market from Belize. I was incredibly impressed with not only their speaking from a sort of pastry chef background, their flavor, but more importantly, the incredible efforts that go to grow some of the most obviously delicious cacao that we'd ever seen. The fermentation processes, which are incredibly thoughtful and meticulous and specifically well measured. We like things that are repeatable so we can obviously get great results batch after batch. And then the wonderful efforts that go back into building community, reforestation, obviously abiding by not only delicious growing practices, but developing new things with like sort of the experimental farm and a lot of ways that we can showcase the fantastic ingredients that we come across. Now, my approach, every chocolate maker, we kind of think ourselves, I would say we're very similar to like the wine industry in that we have very few ingredients. So we need to make sure each of those ingredients are, obviously incredibly delicious and incredibly high quality. So the statistic that really crossed my mind forever ago when I started learning about chocolate, everybody always wants to talk about Hershey's, especially Hershey's milk chocolate. It's the thing that we probably come across more than any other, especially as kids. And to give you a comparison, something like our dark chocolate or even our milk chocolate, let's say our milk, because that's a good kind of one-to-one, our version of milk chocolate has 49% cacao, meaning 49% of the bar came from the tree. That's cocoa beans, cocoa butter, or cocoa solids. Or I should say you take a bean, you squish it, you can split it into those 2 constituent parts. To give you a comparison, a Hershey's milk chocolate bar has around 10% solids. So to get it back to the way that Carla was describing it, we're really looking at a sugar delivery mechanism versus a chocolate bar, the way that we like to think of it. So to say that we showcase the flavor of the bean is absolutely paramount to our business. We are incredibly proud of each and every ingredient, and much like Raka, and believe me, a lot of our chocolate making friends, we tell people where we buy the beans directly on the package. We want you to know exactly who grew, sourced, imported these beans, because we are proud of the fact that those supply chains are equitable, are honestly producing the best stuff that we've ever tasted. And frankly, are just people that we like to associate as people. Most of us, including, William and Simran and Emily and myself, we have personal relationships from all of the people that we buy from. It's very important that not only do we vet them through, business practices and things, but we deal with them one-on-one because it's an agricultural product. When you look at a commodity maker, they want to buy hundreds and hundreds of tons of cocoa beans and blend them all and roast them in a way that the flavor is consistent batch to batch to batch. No matter where you buy a Hershey bar, no matter when you buy a Hershey bar, it will always taste the same because they have such a huge homogeneous group of beans that they basically, it's impossible not to be the same. So with makers like William and myself, we really value the agricultural differences year over year of growing season and flavor changes. If it happens to be a more rainy year, you might get a totally, let's not quite different, but let's say adjusted flavor profile. So much like wine and saying, wow, this is a really great year, a great vintage, we're really proud of the beans that come out each year from each of our origins. So to say let's say 2018 Belizean cocoa beans have more of this flavor, which we're really, in love with. Or for the next year, we might need to tweak our practices to make, let's say, a bar that showcases the flavors of that season. So much kind of more akin to a smaller scale like restaurant or pastry department, we're really looking at each bean that comes across our, our table in a very specific way so that we can highlight the flavors of those origins, which is how I think we differ from these massive organizations. We, it's not just that we source from small shareholder farms, it's that we showcase them. We're so proud that we want to show their efforts through to our products and hopefully give people a chance to understand exactly the supply chain that goes all the way back to the beginning. So I hope I'm not going on too long, but that gives us a very short snippet about us.
Thank you both so much. One thing that occurs to me hearing you speak, in particular about this pairing, is Belize is part of Mesoamerica, which for those of you who might not be familiar, is the place where the cultural heritage of cacao and chocolate really began. People have been growing cacao there for thousands of years. The first recipe for chocolate, which is just one out of thousands of recipes that use cacao, it was tracked to what is today El Salvador, to the Izalcos region. And so when we see this pairing between the cacao traded by Uncommon Cacao and being used by Chef Rosen at Charm School Chocolate, we're seeing a really historical link. That's something that has been going on for hundreds of years through the way that cacao is traded. And in fact, as recent, if we think of it in this way, as the 16 or the 1700s, chocolate consumers would have known the origin or the provenance of the chocolate that they consumed. Here in Massachusetts, we're very proud of our complex colonial history, and we talk about this a lot. Samuel Sewall, who was one of the founding fathers of our state, he presided over the Salem witch trials. I think it's important to mention that as we come up toward Halloween. He wrote in his diary in the late 1600s, for breakfast this morning, I had venison and chocolate. That was an old-timey delicious breakfast, as I understand it. And he knew that his venison was local from Massachusetts and that his chocolate was from Mexico. If you were to say, let's have venison and chocolate for breakfast, the chances that you would know the origin of your chocolate, unless you're having one of these bars that you have in front of you right now, are actually really low. Chocolate has, through this development of the value chain over the past few centuries, become profoundly anonymized in terms of where its raw materials come from, and then even in terms of where the chocolate itself was made or who made it. So there's a lot to think about in all of this. I also wanted to say, as we go into our next, and it'll really be kind of our final question before we get into tasting, thank you to Isaac Wong, who put a really helpful question into the chat. It's what we were planning to talk about next. You can hear in all of our panelists that they're thinking about flavor and quality. There's a lot of goodness that is indicated by what they talk about. This is something that is meant to be prepared well in terms of raw materials, processed in an artisan fashion, thoughtfully, with more attention perhaps to flavor detail than other industrially produced products, with variability in the flavor. It's also something that carries with it a claim of social and economic and environmental goodness. As you can see, Isaac's question, he's asking, how do transparency and ethics affect the price of these products? Certainly the flavor, the investment in the quality affects the price. I'd like to ask you all to think with us about this pricing question. What are the price differences that we see in the cacao that's being traded for these products and also in the chocolate? And how does that impact who your consumer base is? As you think about it, I'll share with everyone a little bit of trivia. Chocolate is considered by many a recession-proof or always accessible product. And there are all kinds of studies that show that, we can be in the most dire of financial times and people will still be happy to spend up to $3.99 for a chocolate bar at the grocery store. What's interesting is that the chocolate industry would also have you believe that even in COVID-19, sales are growing and increasing. People are turning to chocolate for comfort, for an emotional reaction, for an escape from the difficult moment that we're all facing. So chocolate is a lot different than, say, maybe wine. Champagne this year, there are hundreds of thousands of bottles of champagne that are probably going to need to be tossed or turned into, distillery fuel. And that's because consumers are not buying them to hold weddings or to otherwise use that champagne. Chocolate is in many ways still continuing to sell. And part of that has to do with the fact that it's more or less an affordable luxury. Anyways, if I may, for our panelists, would you talk with us about pricing, about flavor and quality, about transparency and ethics, and why it is that the pricing model of what you do is different? I'll toss it to whoever'd like to start. Emily, please.
I'm happy to start. Yeah, so I think a lot of this boils down to the unfortunate reality that we've sort of been tricked into thinking about what chocolate is, and what it actually is something pretty different. So when we think about the standard Halloween candy Carla was describing earlier, these sort of sugary confections that tend to retail at 99 cents for a Snickers bar, or $1.25 for a family-sized pack of M&Ms. That's not really chocolate. And all of the different costs and sort of steps that went into making that chocolate look very different from the steps that go into making a really high quality chocolate like Charm School's Belize or like Rocca's Tanzania bars. It's just a totally different business model. And this starts with things like the cost of farming. If you have a really high productivity, farm, or if you have a really sort of more flavor focused farm where maybe you're cultivating varietals that are more flavorful, but may produce less. And so your cost of production on the farm will be different. The cost of fermentation and drying is very different if you're trying to get to a really high quality flavor profile out of those high quality genetics, or really any genetics, versus what most cacao farmers will do, which is maybe a less controlled fermentation and drying process, very different from what Simran referred to in Tanzania, how they carefully control the fermentation, the drying, same as what we do at Maya Mountain. Just the cost structures of those are different. And so on the cacao production side, there are these different levers that influence the price of cacao. At the end of the day, though, that's not even talking about the price to the farmer, which, if you've been reading the news, this has been very much in the news recently. The Washington Post put out some great articles over the last year around the issues of child labor, forced child labor in the supply chain. And the reality is that cocoa is undervalued. So not only are the practices that are being used to produce commodity cocoa low quality and cheap, but farmers themselves are being significantly underpaid in those commodity supply chains. So when you're looking at a high quality cacao bean that can go into a high quality chocolate, so just speaking on sort of the cacao production side, the key factors are like, what is the farmer actually earning for the cacao? What are their costs of production? So is this actually a profitable activity for them? And then what are the costs to actually produce and export that cacao in a way that maximizes and optimizes the quality that's inherently present in that cacao?
Thank you, Emily. Simran, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think Emily touched on all the things that I was going to talk about, but I think the important thing to note is that like Carla said, chocolate is an affordable luxury. You know, William and Josh make some of the best chocolate in the world. Williams bars are for sale at Whole Foods for, I think, $5.99, $4.99 on special. So I struggle to find another luxury food that you can buy the best of some of the best of the world for for that price. You know, the best bottle of wine in the world is something that I know that I myself will never be able to afford. Same thing with, you know, the best olive oil, some of the best restaurants in the world. Can I afford the best chocolate bar in the world? Yeah, with $20 in my pocket, with plenty of change. And I think the important question is not to ask, but look, do I recognize that a low-income household is going to be able to spend $5 on a bar of chocolate as a regular occurrence? No, that's not practical. For a lot of people, unfortunately, that is reality. And I think the important thing to ask is not so much, why is this chocolate relatively so expensive? It's more, why is this other chocolate so damn cheap? And a lot of it does touch on what Emily was talking about with regards to the amount of effort that goes into producing a high quality cocoa bean. But the reality is, you know, cocoa is a hand harvested crop. You know, you're not driving a combine harvester over a 1,000-acre farm in Iowa. You're going out tree by tree looking for the right pod, using a knife to cut it, breaking the pod by hand, fermenting and drying those beans. So there's an incredible amount of labor that does go into farming cocoa. So when you're able to buy a chocolate bar for 99 cents, like, someone in that supply chain is not being treated fairly. So I think Emily's covered a lot of what I had to say in a more eloquent fashion. So I should probably just leave her to it.
Thank you both for making that so clear. And, you know, to that point around labor, commodity production systems have not been set up to recognize labor. Commodities are traded based on the weight of a primary raw material rather than on how much work it took. Of course, cacao has historically relied on unrecognized familial labor. What I would say too is that labor problem plays out in chocolate manufacturing or making as well. I've often been, I would say, shocked to visit large scale chocolate factories and see exactly how few people need to be there to work, because so many things are handled by large machines that are calibrated, you know, that can kind of, you plug and chug and they sort of do the work of making the chocolate. So I'm curious, William, Josh, how is this different in what you do at your companies? And also, how do you find that consumers respond to it? Do they understand? Do they value it?
Well, there's something that crossed my mind right away when we were talking about, you know, obviously the practices and pricing that comes with, you know, bean sourcing. I'll say the food production aspect of this reminds me a lot of other styles of production that happened in this country, where what made your product delicious was a super closely guarded secret. And so because there are so many, you know, incredibly secretive practices, or at least, let me rephrase, the way that things used to be was that companies would be incredibly secretive as to where they got their ingredients. They would frequently change names and numbers and origins so that you only referred to them as, let's say sugar would come in, it would be assigned what's called an E number. And so people would change those things so that the process was broken down into very specific chunks that workers only knew a small slot of. So you have these trade secrets that live within very secretive kind of black box organizations. And so what I have come to learn, and I'm sure everybody here can echo that, is that I think our job has become, I'd say, like a third education, in that we have to explain the unbelievable processes that go from, you know, taking a seedling all the way to finished chocolate bar. And so myself, and certainly William and many of our colleagues, have extremely open processes in factories where you can literally walk through and see the equipment that makes, you know, your essentially cocoa bean all the way to finished chocolate, and sometimes even confection and farther. And so we do this so that we can try to help communicate and educate to the value of all these, you know, tons and tons of processes that come with it. So to talk about, you know, the pricing model and how, unfortunately, or I should say, fortunately for each of us along the line, you know, we're able to charge something like $8 a bar, which at first, you know, may sound like a lot, but like as Simran said, I think it's very telling that we can buy, you know, some of the best chocolate in the world for under $20. That's crazy to me. You know, it strikes me as fascinating that because obviously we have all these that because of our extensive process, we have to go through this level of education. All right, anywho, hope that helps.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks so much. William, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yeah, sure. So we, just to quickly bounce off the last point about labor in production, it is really interesting because that really affects how, you know, the craft chocolate is then priced. So, you know, Carlo remarked that a lot of these large scale chocolate manufacturers don't have a lot of staff on hand, a lot of large, very efficient machinery, which takes a lot of capital and investment to acquire, is in operation. And that, of course, translates into a cheaper chocolate bar because, as any business person will tell you, and as capitalism has certainly told us, is that labor is very expensive and capital will fight to have as little labor on hand as possible. So, you know, in craft chocolate, that's really quite different. You know, I mean, it really starts from a place from necessity. We all start so small and have to do everything ourselves and by hand. And, you know, we scale up as can be. I think most of us have not received massive amounts of investment, and therefore have had to acquire machines as need be. A lot of us then share that knowledge with each other and pass on tips and tricks and machines and little hacks that we do, which is exciting. But yeah, obviously all of this translates into higher labor costs, which also affects the cost of the chocolate bar. A lot of us are then by necessity setting up, you know, retail spaces in major metros, which come with high rents, higher wages as a necessity to pay those higher rents so you can pay your staff. And so that, of course, again, affects the price of the chocolate bar. So everything from, you know, Coco Camilli paying 36% over the market price, I think you said, someone, for the beans, to us paying more for the beans after the value add processes of fermentation, and whatnot, to, you know, once those beans get to our factory, to all the costs that affect us as a manufacturer in Brooklyn. It adds up and does make a sort of product that sits in this accessible, inaccessible space, I guess, right? Because it is more accessible out of all the luxuries and yet still inaccessible to quite a large swath of the population. This was really apparent recently for us. I mean, we knew this going into it, just one of the reasons that we took so long to launch a product like this, but we put out a baking chocolate very recently. And, you know, to contrast, I think we are $14 for our 8-ounce maple dark baking chocolate. So the maple sugar does add a little bit there as well. To contrast, our cane sugar sweetened variation of this, our classic dark, is $12. To give you a little illustration of ingredient costs. But the next tier, like high quality baking chocolate, I believe, is Guittard, and for the same amount, they are around $9, if I'm not mistaken, depending on the retailer. So that's quite a massive difference. And Guittard is an older company, and they have, I've actually never been to the Guittard factory, but I'm going to base this on my assumption of Guittard, is that they probably have a lot more machines and efficient systems set up to, you know, lower that price for them. I know that they do source high quality cacao, and it is a very high quality chocolate that they make. But, you know, that I pull out is just kind of an example of labor difference right there, since, again, I'm not quite sure what cacao they're buying and what they pay for it, but I would imagine that it's somewhat similar to Raka and not too far off. And that difference then is really just labor and where we are manufacturing, which is in one of the most expensive zip codes in the country, I think. But by being there, we are also where our market is that can sustain, or where we know there is at least interest. I wouldn't go as far as say sustained quite yet. We're still working on that one, but yeah, that's so. It's very difficult to balance all of it.
I think that's just true for sort of most goods in the world, right? Like if you are of the mindset that you would like a tailor-made suit, that's going to cost you more than the suit that I would buy off the rack, right? We are, by a factor of 10, I would guess, the smallest cocoa exporter out of Tanzania. And I know that we employ at least 10 times as many people as the next smallest one, because we pay attention to detail. We want to make sure our beans are fermented properly. We have an extension staff that do agronomy training to farmers and so on and so forth. A higher quality often involves more costs.
Yeah, thank you all for that. And just to put this in another context, if we compare it again to industrial cacao or chocolate production, this is an industry that is heavily secretive and always has been by design. There's a famous story of the founder of Mars going under a pseudonym to work in Switzerland and learn from the best Swiss chocolate manufacturers how to make chocolate, sometimes even wearing a costume, where he was basically there stealing company secrets so that he could come back and start his own company and build Snickers and compete with Hershey's and so on and so forth. And the fact that we have 4 business professionals on a call like this who are willing to share this kind of information is unique in the world of cacao and chocolate, at least by proportion. The vast majority of the cacao and chocolate being traded, being consumed by people is not in any way transparent like this conversation that we've just had. All that said, I think it's time to taste some chocolate. I know that many of you on the call have chocolate with you, and I'd like to invite my colleagues to take us through the pairings. What I might suggest is that we go in the same order that we started. So that would mean Simran and William, if you will, you would introduce us first to the Raka chocolate that is on offer, and then we'll move to Charm School chocolate. I also believe that you may have in front of you a Hershey's candy, kind of like a Halloween Hershey's milk chocolate. Just keep in mind, back to what Chef Josh Rosen shared with us, when you're tasting a Hershey's, you're getting something really quite different. So this might be interesting for comparative purposes. But I'm really curious to hear from all of you. You're welcome to type in the chat as you're taken through this tasting. How is this chocolate different for you? Can you taste its good intention? Can you taste its good flavor? Are there things that work for you? Are there things that don't work for you? Do you buy the value proposition that's on offer? Please go ahead, Simran and William.
Yeah, so I think we have a couple bars. I believe we have our 100% oat milk, pink sea salt, and coconut in the form of minis, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And the bourbon Cascades bar. So the 2 bars that are made with Simran's cacao in that are the 100% and the bourbon Cascades bar, which is an 82% cacao. We really love Coco Camellia cacao. It's one of the highest quality cacaos in the world. And so much so that we really think that it holds up at higher percentages really well, which most cacaos cannot, as one can taste sometimes. So I guess we'll start with the 100% to go darkest to lightest. No need to consume all of it if you cannot stand it. It's definitely not for everyone. I myself, on occasion, will eat it. It is good though. It's just, intense. So it's kind of like the purest example of cacao that you can taste, because it really is just cacao beans and a little bit of cocoa butter. I think what you'll notice right away is the brightness of it. So that is that full-on sort of unroasted, fruity flavor profile. I get a lot of raspberry from it, a lot of tart, maybe a little underripe raspberry, if you will, and then a lot of creamy smoothness. So the Coco Camellia cacao is really creamy. There is that bright flavor profile to it, but it has a great, I guess, a little bit of a higher cocoa butter percentage that kind of mellows it out so it's not just too sharp. I guess it's
Can
so
I ask?
interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
There was a question about, I see Simran answered. So the rocket chocolate is all vegan, I
Oh,
gather.
yeah, sorry. I need to pay more attention to the chat.
No, don't
yeah.
worry. I just want, I'm be
Um,
paying attention to the chocolate, but I just,
Yeah.
someone had asked about that.
Yeah, like Josh, we kind of have become a vegan chocolate maker. I don't think this was a necessarily conscious decision, but both Josh and I make, our teams make a lot of vegan milk chocolate products. Josh does several really delicious coconut milk bars, one of which I may have just ordered right before we entered this call. And we do some coconut and oat milk bars, and some swirl bars in the form of a coconut vegan white chocolate, which I know, Josh, you also make really delicious vegan coconut white chocolates. So yeah, they're quite rare to find on the market, and I think a lot of craft chocolate is vegan by default, and a lot of craft chocolate makers focus on bars that are 70% and above and single origin or 2 ingredient, maybe 3 ingredient if they include cocoa butter. And then there are some dark milk entries into the craft chocolate canon as well that are really delicious, but maybe use traditional milk, or Dick Taylor does like a really fun A2 milk bar, which is kind of exciting to see it get so nuanced like that. I don't know if everyone's had the 100% at this point, but maybe we can move on to the bourbon Cascades bar, which is slightly more crowd pleasing. This was for a while our bestseller. I'm not sure where it lands in the wholesale sales category right now, but it was a bar that we started making in 2013. It was a bar that we discovered by accident. So early on, our head chocolate maker, Nate, was making all the chocolate in his apartment in Bushwick. And he was also making a barbecue sauce on the stove, so the story goes, where he was storing the beans. So this was all in his kitchen. And when he went to make chocolate from those beans, they had the distinct flavor of vinegary barbecue sauce. So, he learned a very hard lesson, which is that cocoa beans are very absorbent of aromatic flavor profiles. And that really actually informed our process. So, we aged Simran's beans in bourbon cask for 6 weeks for this bar. And it kind of mellows out a lot of the brighter flavor profile, and kind of creates a really creamy, mild 82%. We've made other 80% bars with our unroasted beans after this, and none have come out quite as creamy and smooth. And I think a lot of that has to do with both the cacao and the process itself. And from there, we actually use cocoa butter to flavor a lot of our bars. Basically, it's a lot like making candles or ice cream. You use the fat to absorb aroma. And this is actually one of the reasons why we recommend tasting chocolate slowly. It kind of has less to do with savoring, although that's also a great part of it. But letting the chocolate melt solely on your palate allows your nose to pick up on more of the aromas, which will inform what you taste. A lot of taste is from smell. So by allowing the chocolate to melt slowly and also smell the chocolate before you bite into it, which might, I can't think of a single moment growing up where I saw someone smell chocolate before they ate it. But this is actually really the way to taste it. It might make you look a little strange, but you will be benefiting from this because you will be tasting more of the flavor that's naturally in that cocoa, but maybe also whatever the chocolate maker has added to it that is an aromatic compound. So and then just a quick note on the inside of the bars, since we're talking about transparency and value chain. like Uncommon, we like to be really transparent about our sourcing. And we printed a transparent trade report inside both our minis and our bars. And when crafting this, we really wanted to be careful about the kind of language that we were using, because we found in our experience that there was a lot of confusion already in the small craft market about some of these terms that were being used, both in coffee and in chocolate. So where it's like ethical sourcing or ethically sourced or direct trade, what do they all mean? We found that people had different ideas. I would teach chocolate making classes and ask people what they thought these terms meant to that. And they came up with all sorts of different answers, and a lot of them, thought that we would pull up to a farm gate, with a check and exchange a bag of beans for, some cash or a check. And that's, couldn't be further from the truth, even in the craft market. So, and also there are questions about, what is ethical, and, a system that while we are, working with grower organizations and cooperatives that pay higher farm gate prices, and we are paying higher prices for our beans, those are still informed by the commodity market. They're still priced off of the commodity market. You can't just pay, a bunch more in a microcosm. You have to, you're tethered to that market still, because you have to build a sustainable market. So we wanted to not use words like that, which we felt like were, while really great from a marketing perspective, to make the customer feel good, we're subjective, really, and not exactly totally true, and also felt like finishing. So I feel like, when I buy something that tells me I did a really good job for buying it, part of me feels like the work is done, and that I did it. I'm like the best consumer ever, like when I compost or something like that. But that's really just not true. I'm only participating in something that is actually constantly, hopefully, progressing into a better space. And so by eliminating words that felt sort of, I'm sure transparent itself also comes with a little pat on the back feeling to it. But it was the best phrase that we could find that felt objective. And then by printing this, hopefully not complicated graph that illustrates the market prices, the fair trade prices, and the prices that we pay, plus farm gate prices, we're trusting consumers to hopefully be interested in it and learn a little bit about it. I know for a fact that some people read it and say that we're fair trade anyway. I'll be fine with that for now, but we're hoping with just this little piece of information that we can slowly spread education in an organic way. So that's something that you'll find on all inside all the minis, and also in the Bourbon Cascades bar as well. Yeah, there are 3 other bars from the minis. I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll just overview them. And that there's coconut milk and oat milk, and those are really delicious vegan milk bars. The oat milk is my favorite. But our pink sea salt bar is made with beans from Zorzal Cacao, which is a bird sanctuary in the Dominican, or it's a cacao farm and fermentory based within a bird sanctuary in the Dominican Republic. And that's been like our second bestseller for a while now. And yeah, I will give the, Simran, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you've done a really good job. And I think that the importance that you placed around the language is not something that I think I really appreciated, which is bizarre, because we spent hours talking about how you and I spent hours talking about how you should refer to our ethos of our company when the time before last that I met you in Raqqa. So I appreciate that. I don't know if this is the right time, but there was some. No, I guess Carla will get to those questions later.
Yes, yeah, and for anyone who'd like to hop in on the chat, I don't want to answer on behalf of your companies, although I certainly have my own thoughts on those things. But for those questions, please feel free. I will pass it now to Emily and Josh to talk. And just as a point on the time, we have 9 minutes left before I suspect that people will be exiting the Zoom. But I'd like all of you to think about, as you're tasting, as you're listening, what other products do you taste where someone might describe them to you in this way? Were you to have a wine tasting, would someone talk with you about the farm gate price on the bottle of the wine, for example? What about a cheese tasting? So think about this as an interesting point of comparison as we continue. Emily, Josh, please go ahead.
Okay, so I'll jump in. Obviously, we're doing the Charm School chocolate portion, so our bars look like this. I should mention, as William kind of dovetailed into with ours, we are as well a vegan company. We did make that decision as a conscious decision, from the very beginning. I started the company because I wanted chocolate to be more accessible. So I was a engineer, then a pastry chef, and it used to drive me crazy when people would come into restaurants and hotels where I would work, and they would say, I'd love to try your dessert, but I'm allergic to dairy, or I can't eat eggs, or I have XYZ restriction. And so I thought I wanted to build a company, kind of lowest common denominator, that was most accessible to everyone. So I started with the ethos that we were going to be vegan start to finish. No matter when you saw our logo, it would always mean that's kind of where you're, what you're getting. And since then have very much ingratiated myself to the vegan community. And I must say, have gone vegan myself, and I very much enjoy it. So just as a side note, one of the things that strikes me about when you make things like plant-based chocolate is that you cannot center, or this is just my personal opinion, but you cannot center a company around the idea that you are, let's say, replacing or removing an item. It has to be a flavor choice. So for us, we chose to make our version of milk chocolate using Belizean cocoa beans and coconut because I believe, bar none, it is the best milk chocolate I've ever tasted. Now that includes all conventional milk chocolates, but that's just because I prefer, obviously, this flavor profile. I also think that because we use coconut, it has a little bit of inherent sweetness, so we can dial down the sugar and increase the amount of cocoa in the actual final product, so you get a really great bang for the buck. Like, we're trying to make the most flavor-packed bar we could possibly make, and I think the coconut milk is just a perfect example of that. So let's start off with, I'd say, the most consumed chocolate in the world, milk chocolate, or at least our version. So if you've got your coconut milk chocolate handy, please give it a bite, and I'll kind of walk in a little bit about this. As William said, I think it's really wonderful to give it a little bit of time to melt on your palate. I like to take a couple chomps first to start break it up and get some air in there, and then let the chocolate melt. Our version of milk chocolate has 49% cacao, which is a bit high for the sort of industry standard for milk chocolates, usually about 30 to 35% cacao. So I like to think of this as a really kind of chocolate forward milk chocolate. It's a lot less sugar, to be perfectly honest. And so you get a lot more of the sort of inherent flavor of the ingredients. And I think the coconut just offers this incredibly smooth, really wonderful melt. And because I believe all food, at least, all food should be seasoned. We do have a little bit of sea salt in here, which I think kind of rounds out the flavor profile. I like to think of it as just a really, like I said, platonic ideal of milk chocolate. It always reminds me a little bit of almost like a toasty malt back, a little bit of kind of a caramel feel, and that it's got this really unctuous. One of the characteristics that I love most about the Belizean cocoa beans is I think they have this really beautiful kind of umami back. So what I mean is that like savory difference. It's like, let's say you taste it in, like tomatoes have this, as well as certain types of mushroom kind of taste meatier than others. It's that glutamic acid that I think gives it that just really wonderful, rich background. And to be perfectly honest, one of the features of milk chocolate that I think if you sub out ingredients, you tend to lose. So I think the Belizean cocoa beans step in there and just give it this really beautiful back that I think makes for just an incredible milk chocolate. So this is my sneaky bar. This is the bar I love to give people who say they've never, ever tried vegan chocolate before. So I'll give this to them, tell them it's a standard milk chocolate, and then afterwards say, oh, by the way, there's some milk in that. And they tend to get pretty excited. So anywho, now that we've tried that, we should jump into our 70%. So this is more of a showcase of the beans. Obviously the beautiful work that Emily and Uncommon, her team in Punta Gorda do. Which I like to think of, like I said, just the Belizean cocoa beans are just incredibly round. They've got this wonderful chocolatey base. They always make me think of, let's say, a certain chocolate sandwich cookie. Everybody knows Oreo. So they kind of give me that vibe. I really love how creamy they are. It lends, I should say the beans lend themselves to this really, like I said, just pure chocolate happiness. They also kind of remind me a little bit of plump raisins, almost like a raisinette kind of feel. I think, Carla, if I'm not mistaken, you have a soft spot for raisins. So perhaps this was chosen for you. But like I said, our goal is to find really fantastic ingredients and just don't mess with them too much. We do roast, unlike Raka. We try to draw out more flavors through roasting. I think there are certain things that you can kind of build off of. So this is a little bit different flavor profile, more towards the chocolate you know and love. One of the things that I'll say kind of struck me as we were talking is that we picked a heck of an industry to work in that people, I think we have a lot of heavy lifting to do in that people sometimes look at chocolate as an ingredient, not just a finished product. So, you know, we tend to think of chocolate as, you know, obviously this wonderful product capable of flavors, you know, from super fruity and raspberry to malty and toasty to all kinds of funky things. Again, very similar to wine in that you have the same grape grown in different parts of the world, you get different flavor profiles. So that kind of dovetails with the previous comment of mine in that I do think a large portion of our job as, you know, chocolate makers and participants in the chocolate industry is to educate and to say, I know the chocolate that you've had, I know how kind of homogenous it's been, but here's what it's capable of. And look at the wonderful things that we can find by working with Emily and people like Simran who just do the work to get, you know, what we believe to be the full spectrum of the deliciousness that can be chocolate. So hope that helps.
That
just
was
a quick,
amazing. Emily, go ahead.
I just want to add on. So personally, I think of all of the Belize chocolate bars that are out there, Josh's background as a pastry chef really through just a better Belize bar out there. And he does so many incredible things with it from the vegan perspective, but it's my #1 gifting bar of any of our customers because it's such a crowd pleaser. You can sort of go taste the rainbow, all of the different flavors that he has. And he didn't mention this, but you can actually even go meet him in person. I went last weekend because I happen to be in the Maryland area this month, but yeah, you can go taste the bars with him and chat with him this weekend, I think, coming up.
Yes, please. Emily, thank you. That was perfect. On Friday and Saturday, we'll actually be setting up a little tent in front of our shop, kind of our version of what a, let's say, chocolate show would be. But normally we would invite people in. We're trying to be a little bit safer, so it'll be open air. But if you're in the area, if you decide to stick around Maryland, please come say hi. The wonderful part of coming is that you do obviously get to try a bunch of things that you wouldn't normally get to try. So usually grocery stores get a little mad if you start opening bars and tasting them, but you can taste a bunch of our products and, you know, get to chat in person. So if you have any questions, we'd be happy to expound on all the wonderful things that we're doing. So thank you, Em. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all so much. Our little cacao and chocolate train has been racing along the tracks. We're now going to stop so that you can all get off and move on to the next part of your day. But thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone for your questions. The one negative part of tasting on Zoom is that we can't really see if you liked it. So if you want to give us a reaction, maybe a thumbs up or a clap, please go ahead. And Nima and David, I turn it back to you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. For those of you who were joining us from the Suitable app, I just wanted to share the QR code for this event as well. It'll be on the screen for the next few seconds. I just wanted to say thank you so much to our panel, everyone, your insights, Carla, Josh, Emily, Simran, William, were so invaluable, and I just had a great time both for my brain and my belly and my tongue the last few minutes. So thank you for your time today, and I'll pass it over to David.
Yeah, I'll just ditto that. And again, part of the inspiration for this is in this time of Zoom, when so much of our learning has to happen in 2 dimensions, I just thought, let's engage some of our other senses. And obviously it's more than just eating chocolate, but understanding chocolate and understanding the work that goes into it, the opportunities in this space, the range of challenges, and meeting such extraordinary entrepreneurs who are driving change in this way is really wonderful. And thank you, Carla, for kind of sharing your world with us. And thank you everyone for coming. And I think for the students, we're going to have a lot to talk about and maybe a little leftover. I don't know. But we really appreciate all of your time today and all the work you're doing when you're not talking to us. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. And for those of you looking for work or for research projects, please consider Specialty Cacao and Chocolate. These are all really valuable companies. Their success is our success in building a different world. And so we hope and we look forward to the possibility of working with all of you.